Namaste and welcome to Bharatvaarta. I'm Roshan Cariappa, and on this podcast, we will be discussing India-UK relations. Of course, this is in light of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's recent visit to India and the free trade agreement that will hopefully be signed by the end of this year. Joining me, I have Nirav Kanodra, who is a regular guest on Bharatvaarta. Nirav is an investment banker based out of Singapore and has an active interest in economics and policy. Hey, Nirav, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Carrie. Hi, Sunil. Thanks for having me.
And we also have Sunil Sharma joining us from the UK. Sunil is the Chief Operating Officer at the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, an organization that supports an outward-looking Britain. We've, of course, partnered with the CFOC on multiple episodes. Hey, Sunil, great to have you on the podcast.
Hey, Roshan. Good to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. So thanks so much for joining, Nirav and Sunil. We really have a lot to discuss. This is going to be super engaging. To begin things, maybe we should back up a little bit and talk about a bit of history, right? India and UK, of course, have a huge shared history. India has been trading with Britain even before the East India Company, and of course, we had 2 centuries of British colonial rule after that. There's a great deal that we share, right, with the UK. I mean, the language, of course, English, cricket, and cuisine for sure, right? Britain's love for chicken tikka is, of course, legendary. A large number of Indians now live in the UK as well. Sunil, we'll start with you. I mean, if you could give us a little bit of perspective on how things have been with India and UK post-independence, and maybe talk about things that have happened, especially in recent years.
Yeah, sure. I think it's naturally a quite complex relationship in some ways. Obviously, post the end of the empire, I think India made the sort of significant move of remaining in sort of inside the Commonwealth of Nations when it became republic. Typically, to be honest, we've pretty much had different pathways, I think, post since then. I think that the first real sign of that was the Cold War, where of course UK became one of the founding members of NATO, supporting United States of America. India joined the non-aligned movement, where it essentially decided to not take sides on either party. So I think that was probably the start of I wouldn't say a divide, but a definite difference in opinion on the two countries. And I think naturally, so it sort of made sense. India's military equipment throughout history, generally Russia and Soviet Union has been the sort of biggest partner. So I don't think there was necessarily a lot of bad blood in this situation. I think as we fast forward to now, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, there has been a sort of new movement, if you like, in the UK, which has sort of said that we should have closer ties with India. Naturally, we have a massive India diaspora in the UK. Indians in the UK actually outperform British white people. So in almost every scale that there is, whether it's economically, education, managerial positions, all the way down to least likely to go to jail. They beat your typical white British person in England. There's been natural change there, I think, in terms of the feeling between lots of people in this country towards India and wanting closer ties. And to be honest, it was part of not just India, but a massive thing of the Brexit movement was building closer ties outside of countries, outside of the European Union. And there's been a massive thing in this country, a massive movement, which was, it's not necessarily fair that someone from, let's say, France or Greece, maybe not qualified, has no qualifications, can come into this country straight away, whereas someone in India who is extremely qualified, we actually have a skill shortage, finds it incredibly difficult to come here. So that kind of sentiment really started to brew, and I think now we're starting to see some positive movement. I think there's a long way to go, but yeah, there's definitely some really positive movement now.
So I'm a little curious, right? I mean, does the whole colonial history as such even is that a bit of a hangover even now, or I mean, have people really found ways to move past that in the UK?
In the UK, it's I would say there's probably London, I'd say London and areas around London, they're the people that will talk about colonial history. So you'll see BBC will talk about it regularly, that there is a constant colonial, it's become a much topical thing now the last maybe 3 to 5 years. I'd say it's really grown. I think naturally, as we're now looking at India and Australia and other countries as more partners, people have started now to say, well, what happened historically and such a question. Some of it's not all bad. Some of it is, it does make sense, to kind of revisit that history. A lot of it is, there is a feeling though, especially with the Indian diaspora, a lot of them don't seem to care too much it typically seems like it tends to be middle to upper class people based in and around London. That tends to be the people who talk about it, the sort of younger demographic between 20 and 40, reasonably educated. They seem to be the ones probably driving this argument more. I'd say the rest of the country, I think, if I'm honest, I don't think they really care or pay much attention to it.
Yeah, I think it's also part of a larger cultural movement, right? I mean, call it wokeism or whatever else, right? I mean, that is seeking to kind of revisit some of these historical tropes. And yeah, I mean, that's a fairly complex thing that's happening. So Nirav, from our perspective, of course, given our rich history and legacy, why is it really important for us to have good relations with the UK at this point of time?
Sure. So I will say one thing. So yes, definitely part of the colonialism was, you would say, like a little bit of like extractive policies and over taxation. But actually, in terms of trade, I want to highlight you going back to the American Civil War. So prior to the American Civil War, cotton was predominantly grown in the American South and was shipped over to Britain in the textile mills around Manchester. So that was the hub of the textile industry there. Due to the war, ships could not go from the American South to UK. And what happened? India stepped in, and you saw a lot more cotton being grown in India. You saw a lot of even textile mills which was set up later on. The Indian Railways was set up to transport cotton to Bombay, and from there to go on ship to England. And after that, the University of Mumbai was set up by the profits of the merchants. So University of Bombay, as it was known then, via this trade and the profits that this generated. So you can clearly see that at a particular time, trade can benefit India. It has benefited India. Another example, one way that I would say is UK faced a big trade deficit with China. They were importing a lot of tea and certain spices and silk. At least for tea, they did manage to grow it in India, which they had a little more leverage due to the colonial rule. And you made India like a nation of tea drinkers as well. Case where you saw a substitution. So this is one thing. Then if you see what happened in India is after the colonial era. So definitely Gandhi said that yes, Britain was using India for its raw materials and then using it as a market for its finished products, right? And there was a little more leverage in Britain's way than India's way. But that doesn't mean that India should have totally stopped and closed down on international trade, right? I think we learned the wrong lessons probably, or maybe what was appropriate for 1940s and 1950s. India remained a closed economy pretty much. There was a small opening in early 80s, but in 1991, when India really opened up its economy, the second part is due to India's large percentage of the population being agrarian and in all the free trade agreements to protect its agricultural sector, India has not been very keen on signing up FTAs with the rest of the world. India did sign a few FTAs with Japan, South Korea, ASEAN. And what happened at that point is you saw India was having an FTA with the countries which have a trade surplus with large manufacturing hubs. And so what happened is India saw a bit of deindustrialization because a lot of the manufacturing jobs moved away from India. It did not suit India with its surplus labor could actually export things to, right? So now what has happened is we are seeing like a huge amount of geopolitical churn. This is not unlike, you would say, this whole period, I would say, it started since the great financial crisis, COVID, and now you've got this Russia-Ukraine war. It's not unlike periods of, like, say, World War II, where you saw like kind of end of colonialism after that, or as I mentioned earlier, the American Civil War, right? What this is you're seeing a lot of supply chains are moving away. You've had like China, who's been like a monopoly exporter, big manufacturer. A lot of countries want to get away from just one supplier because you could have supply chain issues. Similarly, UK has actually decided that for various reasons, more political reasons, it doesn't want to be tied into the EU and wants to keep its own sovereignty. And hence, losing out on one trade partner, UK is looking at other trade partners in Australia, India, the Caribbean, where they had historical links due to the British Empire, as well as they have a common language also uniting like all these countries, right? So that's another thing. And I would say specifically here, right now, why does UK and India kind of complementary in skill sets or what resources we have? See, UK is a small country with a small population, small rich population. There's a lot of surplus capital, right? India is a young population, a very highly populated country, excess of labor, but lack of capital, right? India has strengths in like information technology. UK has strengths in finance, in law, in capital raising, right? So these are kind of complementary skill sets. UK has a trade deficit with the rest of the world, but also has a trade deficit currently with India as well, right? So I think that's another thing. So I think all of these things, I would say, put together, it's the right timing. A lot of these things have to fall into place at the right time and given kind of like shared values. And unlike like the colonial rule where there was too much leverage on one side, I would say like India and UK both are about $3 trillion economies, right? So both are roughly equal economies, but of very different shape and size. So I think free trade between like these two nations can benefit both of them, right? So I think that's also another thing to be noted. So yeah, that's where we are from history till now, and India also at this moment. So I think like in 90s we opened up the economy, and now what India is going out and doing is over the last 30 years we found out where India was lacking. There's a lot more push on infrastructure. There's a lot more push on manufacturing at home. And now there's a lot more push of getting more integrated in the world economy. 2 FTAs have been signed, one with Australia, one with the UAE. There's talks of FTA with the UK, also probably with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, so and maybe the EU. So what is happening is India is opening out to the world. As I said, like these are kind of pivotal moments or these kind of events where a lot of people are changing their geostrategic partners. So yeah, it happens to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah. And the India-UK movement has been growing for some time now, right? I mean, I remember, I think David Cameron was, Prime Minister Cameron was one of the first proponents of this, right? And then Prime Minister Modi visited the UK in November of 2015. And yeah, especially I think post Brexit, Britain, with Britain now seeking to move and partner with other countries across the world, I think it's gained a lot more prominence. So Sunil, with all of this building up, what is the significance of Prime Minister Johnson's visit to India? Obviously he's super entertaining, all of his speeches and everything, right? And we had his characteristic, remarks, right? I mean, he called Prime Minister Modi his khas dost, right? Compared himself to Amitabh Bachchan and Sachin Tendulkar in the promotions and whatnot, right? So what do you make of Prime Minister Johnson's visit?
I think it's been largely like successfully received here in the UK. He is going through some of his own political troubles right now. I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit later. But I think we touched on when David Cameron, he was the first one to say this is the new special relationship with India. I think it was in 2010. And then, there has been a general movement towards this. Theresa May's first country that she visited as prime minister, that a non-European country that she visited as a prime minister was India, and obviously Boris Johnson has spoken very highly of India during his time as mayor, during his time as an MP. So there is that sort of growing shift there, but I think it's a really significant move and visit with what's going on in the UK currently. I think there's two ways to look at it. I think some people looked at it as very positive in the sense of, he's out there, trying to secure an important trade deal as we're, in the post-Brexit era, and not enough's really been done with India. It's taken quite a long time. The other side, which is what other people would argue in the opposition camp, is he trying to deflect away from his home troubles, him going abroad, spending time with another powerful, strong leader, portrays him the same as he trying to deflect. So I'd say it's been fairly mixed response. The visit itself, if you just isolate that, I think that's been very successfully perceived in the UK. Everyone is generally very happy at him being in India, actually making the effort. I think it's similar to what Nirav's been saying. There is a sort of change in what's going on across the world. I think COVID-19 has really highlighted that. In England, there's a massive shift to move away from China. We saw in the pandemic how reliant we are on China, where it comes to economics, where it comes to stuff like PPE, which really hit home for a lot of people, where I think the average person probably didn't really care too much about the relationship when they saw on the news that there was a lack of ventilators, lack of PPE. I think the average person started to think, okay, maybe we are too close with China. And so I think a lot of people in the UK perceive India as a potential alternative to China. And I think him going there will only strengthen that case.
So Nirav, we'll talk about specific aspects of the FTA, but from a broad 30,000 feet up in the air sort of a perspective, right? What are some key things on the trade, defense, and cultural side of things that are of interest for India and UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, actually, Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited Gujarat, where he actually spoke about setting up a biotechnology university there in collaboration with the University of Edinburgh. Those kind of things also will be there. And second thing is UK was an open labor market for Europeans. And now, so the stock of Europeans already working in the UK, they can stay on, but the flow will stop, right? So this one is obviously India has a lot of excess labor. I will not call it like excess, but there's enough educated labor which can work in the UK or like work with UK companies, even if they're based out of India, with the whole concept of remote work coming in. Already some of it was happening in IT services, but probably you will see more in legal services, probably a little bit of telemedicine. So I think they're in such kind of person-to-person contacts is one thing. Second is now India also, after this war in Russia and Ukraine, India also realizes that its hands are tied because of its dependency on Russia for its military equipment and spare parts for its military equipment, right? Here is where earlier, as India, while non-aligned, was a little bit leaning more towards the Soviet side, right? And now India is trying to again come back in the center. India has been buying military equipment from France, from Israel, right? And now probably even in the UK. So I think that's another thing. And then I would like to say, like, I'll give a few examples of like India-UK partnership, right? And some things even before any FTA has been signed, something which have done quite well. So one is like a brand which I love is like Royal Enfield Motors, right? So the motorcycle company was a British firm. It had a factory in India. Then the British entity actually died down and Eicher Motors acquired it in India and they've maintained the brand. They've done a fantastic job with it till that they went back to the UK and now they're manufacturing in the UK as well. So that's one aspect of India-UK partnership. Something similar is Jaguar and Land Rover being owned by Indians, Tata Group, manufacturing in the UK and bulk of the sales are in China, right? So I think that's, you're looking at a globalized world. So that's two, kind of similar. And then this one is my real favorite one from the recent episode, the pandemic. You had research for the vaccine done in Oxford University. The company AstraZeneca is a Belgian and an English company. A lot of it was manufactured in India by the Serum Institute of India, right? In India, Serum Institute is the largest manufacturers of vaccine in the world, just because India produces the most number of babies in the world, right? And with that large scale, so I think these are where complementary skills come in, right? You've got, say, higher end R&D happening probably in the UK. You're seeing like a little bit of capital and technical know-how coming from there. And India comes in the place where you can manufacture in size and scale. And with the economy of scale, you can get it down to like an extremely cheap product and an extremely reliable product. So you're reliable, cheap, and like quick to the market. And we saw all of it, right? So I think this is another example. So these are the ones where we had a lot of friction between India and the UK, right? To do business, to trade. If we remove any frictions, we will see a lot more of these come up, right? So there will be a lot more of such positive examples. I can only imagine. It's as much as there can be. So I leave it to the audience's imagination.
Yeah, no, and I think JLR probably employs 1 lakh people or so, right, in Britain. Yeah. So with that background, let's talk about the FTA, right? It was launched formally in January. I think the second round of negotiations have concluded. And you had, Prime Minister Johnson famously say, get it done by Diwali, right, this year. The interim agreement will include a tariff liberalization in about 60 to 65% of the traded goods. So how significant is this FTA, Nirav?
So I would say, for both the countries, right, this FTA is like a step towards the direction that they want to take. Britain wanting to move away a little bit from the EU, India kind of becoming less closed. It's still a fairly closed economy and become a little less closed. Absolutely, this is in a way crucial. It gives India a market access which is equal to India's whole size, right? So that is one thing. Already India does export to the UK and does import also quite a bit. So if we see, India is doing a lot of machinery exports and some little bit of gems and jewelry. You have a bit of software services, IT services, and India imports stuff from the UK. India is importing famous thing, which is they're trying to debate the duties, is Scotch whiskey, but also advanced capital goods equipment. So for advanced machinery, high precision machinery, etc. So I think what this FTA does is UK. The other one is UK law firms would want to have access to India, right? And also because of the Indian legal systems, probably a lot of arbitration cases could actually move to UK, for example, if things all go right. So here I would say is UK can offer a bit of such services, like say finance or legal services to India. India can offer a lot more of the manufactured goods and a lot of services. You would call them like the bulk services, right? So I would say UK does stuff which is good, which is expensive and small, like the UK, right? It's a rich and small country. And India can do things which are large and economical. I don't want to call it cheap, but large and economical, right? So these are two complementary things. And by signing the FTA, we will see a lot more cooperation. There are already a lot of cultural links. You have a lot of Indian citizens who live and work in the UK. You have a lot of people of Indian origin who are born in the UK. They're British citizens, but they have family in India. There are a lot of cultural links. England has probably invented most of the sports in the world. India only plays some of them, but still we have like these sporting links as well. So that's another thing. So yeah, all in all, I think this FTA is both sides are eager to get it done, right? It is working in benefit of both the economies. I think it is beneficial both sides. So yeah.
Yeah, Sunil, this is more of a factor post Brexit as well, right? I mean, Nirav mentioned Scotch whiskey, for example. A majority of the imports were to the EU, but now, a lot of the manufacturers have had to negotiate individually with all of these, 10, 15 countries, right? India consumes perhaps the most amount of whiskey in the world, right? And I think foreign liquor is probably about 3% or so, maybe even less. They're predicting that it'll probably double in the years ahead. Right. So yeah, I mean, there are so many synergies on that front, not to forget, that a partnership with India will really open up the whole Asian African markets as well for the UK. Right. So yeah, I mean, what do you make of this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's worth noting, even for UK exports to India, at the moment, they're considerably higher than what you see with the States. So I think on average, it's around 19% with India. With USA, for example, it's around 2%. So you can see there's a massive change there. I think if they did get that sort of the FTA done, it would give them that advantage over the States and EU, who both don't have that relationship. So I think UK is definitely looking at that to get that sort of first mover advantage over those two blocks, if you like. I think going to Neil's point in terms of labour, UK does have in lots of areas labour shortages. IT is a very good example where there is a labour shortage in this country in the IT sector. And naturally, India produces a lot of great people in IT. So there's that again practical solution that they could offer. So I think what you said, Roshan, about the change since Brexit, I think it's being a bit more strategic and thinking a bit more. And I think a lot of the stuff aligns right now with India. It just, for whatever reason, for everything that's gone on in the world, it seems to be the IT is a good example. We have an IT shortage. You have lots of people in IT, so it makes sense that we with what's happened with Brexit, I think UK has now decided that it needs to pay a much bigger attention to countries outside. Naturally, again, India is expected to be the third biggest economy by 2050. So again, it makes sense for us to get in there early. I also want to sort of raise about how, in terms of student visas, is a massive thing that we talk about a lot in the UK. So I think there's a massive push. We've already done it with Australia. I think we're looking to do something similar with India right now in terms of making it easier for students to come to this country. So I mean, the Australians, for example, I think it's between 18 and 30, they can stay in this country unrestricted for 2 years on a student visa. So they can study in the UK, they can work in most jobs. And then now, I know for example, Boris Johnson has spoken about how he wants to do the similar sort of thing with India. So there is, in terms of course, the FTA is the focus, and 100% should be. But I think there's a lot more around that as well that can happen. And you've rightly talked about the military side of things. And I think the FTA opens up a very practical solution for both countries. I think as India sort of moves away from the Soviet Union, Russia kind of relationship, and we kind of move away from China reliance, I think it just is kind of come at the right time.
No, I think on the defense front, especially, right? I think UK accounts for less than 1% of India's defense purchases right now. That is a whole other aspect that we can explore. Nirav, there's this talk of this 2030 roadmap as such, right? And Prime Minister Johnson as well referred to it, in a few addresses. What are the key features of this, 2030 roadmap?
This roadmap is, so you're not just having like one FTA signed, one and done deal and move on, right? So it is a roadmap for, and this was like talked about last year. So actually, Boris Johnson was supposed to visit India in 2021 on 26th of Jan as a chief guest on our Republic Day. But that time, UK had a huge outbreak of COVID. Then it got pushed to April 21 when India had like its second wave of COVID. And so now finally it's happening in April. It happened in April 2022. But so this has been spoken since like last year. And it is where India and UK want to have a framework for relationship across health, climate, trade, education, science and technology and defense. This is, you're working more like partners. And there's a lot of cooperation. There's a lot of like another topic which I wanted to say earlier was like the NHS. So apart from doctors, but there's a lot of shortage of nurses as well, right, in the UK. And this is anecdotal, but you had a lot of East European nurses coming and working in the UK, and sometimes there was a language barrier. In India, like English, even if it's not a first language, is a second language for a lot of people, right? So I think there's some cooperation will actually really make sense. And you're talking about like supply chains on critical medicines, vaccines, and medical equipment and products, right? So another thing which the pandemic made everyone realize that China is really the factory of the world. Even if you might be manufacturing medicines, there are like a lot of active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, as they call in the pharma world, where China has a monopoly, right? So that is something where India has actually set up like production linked incentives to manufacture some of them in India. And India does a very good job of manufacturing bulk generic pharma. Yeah. So as I said, it's economic, it's large and big in size, right? Like huge volumes. And UK has a lot of advanced pharma companies and which are doing more of the cutting edge research. So again, this is like another partnership. As we saw AstraZeneca and Serum Institute, I think that happened when there was no FTA, right? If there is an FTA, there is exchange of people, you have people visiting back and forth, you have companies setting up offices in both locations. I think the scope of cooperation is massive. The other one is, I want to mention about like geostrategic geopolitics as well. UK is a member of the Five Eyes network with US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And now they have the AUKUS in the Indian Ocean, right? So Australia, UK, and the US. India is part of the Quad, which has Australia, US, and Japan. All of them, so they want a greater cooperation in geostrategic and military cooperation. Especially you're seeing with the rise of China, UK wants India as a counterbalance. India needs UK and other allies to counterbalance China as well, right? So again, these are like complementary interests aligning together. And so the good part over here, I feel, is when you have like a roadmap 2030, which is like 8 years down the line, it ensures sustained cooperation and you're moving up step by step, right? Yep. So one of the aims from the FTA is that we double our bilateral trade. And I think that is, I would say, like the smallest thing. Probably we'll exceed that. And on all the other things, such as say setting up a university in Gujarat with the help of University of Edinburgh, right? We'll see a lot more cooperation. So I think it's a nice thing to have a framework and a map, and hopefully we exceed whatever they're looking for.
Right, Matt. The one that I really liked was the cybersecurity element of it. I think so. The good thing about this map, I think sometimes, I think like you say, Nirav, we have some of these agreements, you sign it, and that's the end of it. You can see it's a modern, it's an evolving, what I expect it to be, a sort of evolving map. Cybersecurity is a great one where they've put as one of their sort of main points, which I think again with China and even in Russia to a certain extent, it's a massive thing that's talked about a lot in the UK, and I'm sure it affects India and it's going to affect everyone. So I think that was a really good sign to show they're really thinking about what they're doing in this roadmap. It's not just for the sake of doing it, which sometimes it can sometimes seem like. I think stuff like that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, the fact that they have goals and milestones also means that it shows the kind of seriousness that both the governments have, right? I mean, both the countries countries have. Sunil, if we were to turn the lens to UK and UK politics in specific, right? Prime Minister Johnson hasn't had the best time politically at this point of time. There's the whole Partygate scandal investigation that's ongoing right now. For our audience who may not be very well versed on what's happening in UK politics at this point of time, could you just give us like a short summary of everything?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, post COVID-19, if we go back March 2020, the UK government, Boris Johnson, put out a lot of different measures. They included, they went all the way to lockdowns where you essentially couldn't leave your house, and you could leave your house maybe for an hour a day. You couldn't use public transport, lots of different restrictions. He then, as COVID started to die down, the death started to lower, he then changed the restrictions. So he softened them. There's still restrictions in place, but slightly different. So an example is you had a rule of 6. So you could go outdoors with a group of 6 people, but only from 2 different households. So for example, if I lived with 2 other people, I could then go meet another group of 3 people from the same household. As you can see, it's quite confusing in general. I think the general idea was to try and be accountable and try and acknowledge the fact that there is a deadly virus going around. So after setting these rules, it's now come out, pictures essentially got leaked of Boris Johnson essentially breaking these rules that he created. And now he was investigated by the police, he was investigated by Parliament, and he got found guilty by the police, and he was liable for a £50 fine, which is what he did. And now the big topic at the moment is, did he mislead government? So he essentially went to House of Commons and said what had happened. Now the investigation is, did he actually lie about what he had said he had broken? That's the big question now. So naturally, that's taking a bit of a toll on his sort of reign as Prime Minister. Everyone has a sort of different opinion on it. It's quite volatile at the moment. In some ways, what's helping him a little bit is the fact that the Labour opposition leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has now been shown in the last week or so also breaking the rules. And they effectively jointly together voted in these rules. So the whole of the Conservative Party, when all these restrictions, they were both in, it's bipartisan, but they both, essentially agreed to do this. So that's kind of helping him a little bit now. It's a bit of a mess in terms of what's going on. Currently also, what adds even more fuel to this, we, as of next week, are having local elections across the country. So councillors in various different cities and states will be getting elected or removed, and that will be a really good indicator to see how much effect this actually has had on Boris Johnson. It's really hard to tell again with Boris Johnson. I think naturally people who vote for Boris Johnson, who are big fans of his, they know his kind of characteristics. They're not necessarily voting for a figure like a Barack Obama or even a David Cameron. This is kind of his. He's known to make a few gaffes every now and then. This is kind of his what he sort of does. But I think there is a general feeling this has definitely had an impact, a negative impact. How negative? I think the elections next week will be a very good indicator of that. So some people are calling for him to resign. Amongst the actual party itself, I think there's only been a handful of MPs that have said that. So it seems, as of today, it looks like he will ride out this sort of storm. As with Boris Johnson, he does have these kind of things do generally tend to happen, and he does normally kind of ride them out. So yeah, that's the kind of situation in the UK. It's very messy. It's very confusing. He's receiving a fair amount of support from the cabinet at the moment, which is good. I think what kind of helps him is there isn't really, as of yet, an alternative to Boris Johnson. So for a long time, a lot of people saw Rishi Sunak as the alternative to Boris Johnson. He was very popular amongst the general population. So what Rishi Sunak's very good at, or was until a few weeks ago, was you could be a Labour supporter, someone who typically votes Labour. He was seen as someone who could get that vote, which other Conservative people can't. He also technically broke the rules, so he had to pay a fine as well. And now there's lots of questions about his wealth. He's a very wealthy man, and now all of a sudden his popularity has declined. So in some ways that helps Boris Johnson because people don't see an alternative. So yeah, it's very chaotic. So when the India trip did actually happen, there was a massive sort of question mark. Should he be doing this? Should he go to a foreign country? Whilst at the moment in the UK, it seems like there's chaos. And yeah, so it's very, very messy in the UK.
Right. And I think the national elections are due in 2024, right? Like in India. Yeah.
There's in 20. So he's got a bit of time to sort of ride this out. It's really hard to tell with Boris Johnson because I think the general, I always say the temperature in this country is very different. We're very I think we're at one of our most divided stages in terms of city life and the rest of the country. So London versus everyone else in some ways. I think we'll see that in the local elections coming up, that there is a real, if you speak to people in the city, a real distaste for conservatives, people like Boris Johnson. I think the more you move out, less people sort of care about these sort of things. So there's a real, in the UK, a massive kind of divide there. So I think what they're hoping I think what Boris Johnson's hoping to happen, ride this out. They're currently doing the investigation in Parliament. I think he probably thinks he'll come out not guilty in terms of misleading government and move on. I think that the bigger issue is because what it seems like to the average person in the UK is just that the guys up top, all of them just decided to break the rules, whilst other people decided, to actually follow them. So I think it's generally ruined a bit of credibility for all of them in some regard. It's a bit like in the UK, we had a scandal maybe 10 years ago about the MP expenses. Each person gets an expense list of how much they can spend and what they can spend on. And basically 10 years ago, it got proven that both Conservative and Labour MPs were abusing it and doing, using stuff to buy a second house. Like, they weren't, that they clearly had misused it. I've got a feeling it's a very similar thing where I think some trust and credibility has been a bit broken. But then again, it's Boris Johnson. So he has this capacity to just kind of move past these things. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Teflon Boris. So
yeah.
So, what I was trying to get at is there bipartisan support for a partnership with India, assuming that Labour will perhaps put up a better candidate than, let's say, Jeremy Corbyn for 2024, which is not too much, right? I mean, too much to ask. If you were to play out a scenario where, let's say, a Labour Party were to come to power, would they be equally enthusiastic about, a partnership with India?
If you look at what's happened in the last, even with Sir Keir Starmer, it's definitely a massive improvement from Jeremy Corbyn, 100%. The bigger issue that the Labour Party has in this country is, and this is one of the reasons typical Indian voters have moved from Labour to voting Conservative. And it's worth noting, I always say this, the biggest group of people after white Brits who voted for Brexit was British Indians. So I think it's around 40% of all Indians voted Brexit, which is by far the highest of any minority group. I think the issue that a lot of Indians have faced with the Labour Party, and still currently, is that there was a massive anti-India sentiment, especially in 2019 election. That was really felt, especially when they decided the stuff they said about Kashmir and stuff like that. And even still, it hasn't really fully died down. There does seem to be a much pro sort of Pakistan element to Labour Party than in India. That for sure is still an issue, and that's why they lost a lot of what you'd call typical Labour seats in the 2019 election, and even locally they've lost a lot of typically Labour places, and they still haven't really engaged. I think Sir Keir will do a better job for sure than Jeremy Corbyn engaging with India. I'm not sure if we would see a 2030 roadmap, because I don't think his voters or his party would allow for that right now, because of their relationship or what they perceive of Pakistan and just generally that anti-India movement really hasn't died down. I'd say they've stifled it, they've stopped it from growing more, but there still doesn't seem to be the same sort of talk about doing stuff with India. I mean, if you look at Labour's party's manifesto and stuff, India's just not mentioned. It's not even really seen as as big as it should be. Who knows? Maybe his sentiment will change, but as of now, I think there's a massive. If you look at again the demographics of voting, the average average British Pakistani person would be voting Labour. Average Indian's a bit split, which is surprising because historically Indians vote Labour. That's what happens in the UK. So I don't think it's completely bipartisan. I think that the good thing is there is a general thing we should do more of India. I think that's a general, everyone would agree on that. How far? I think defence would definitely be a really touchy subject if you brought that up with the Labour Party, for sure, because they have condoned India multiple times on attacks to Pakistan and stuff like that. So I think that's where, and also they've been a lot less critical of China than the Conservative Party. So again, I don't envisage as strong relationship with the two.
But I will say that, Prime Minister Johnson is one of the most entertaining people in politics, perhaps at this point of time, right? I mean, of course, there's a huge void left by Donald Trump, but one of his remarks in, I think it was some kind of a parliamentary committee or something, which went viral, right? I mean, where he called someone great supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies or something like that.
Yeah. Is Boris Johnson popular in India? Is he seen as popular in Indian?
Well, he does have all of these great sound bites, right? I mean, what do you think, Nirav? I mean, so I certainly like him for all of his diction and his, Churchillian quotes and whatnot, right? I mean, I've seen a fair few speeches of his, and he really has that sort of a charm, I would say, and he really sold it, right? I mean, his India visit this time, I mean, whether it was spinning the charka or like the speeches and whatnot, I mean, he came across as fairly affable, I would say, right? And and a lot of meaningful steps as well. I mean, what's happened in recent times, with his reaching out. So
yeah. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. Like, what Boris Johnson has done is he's played media to his favor. To be fair, an average Indian barely knew who the Prime Minister of the UK was. Unlike, say, for example, who the President of the United States would be, a lot more Indians would know about them, right? Despite all the cultural links, despite like a lot of person-to-person contact, politics was not really discussed. To be fair, not a lot of people might actually even know Theresa May was the Prime Minister for a short while. You went from David Cameron to Theresa May to like Boris Johnson, and prior to that, you had Blair and Gordon Brown. So what Boris Johnson has done is he's played media and he's played to the gallery. He's kind of used a lot of terms. He's highlighted Indian icons like Sachin Tendulkar, Amitabh Bachchan. He went, I don't know whether it was scripted or what, when there's like a very partisan demolition of some illegal encroachments. They were done by JCB bulldozers, and he stood on a JCB, which is a British company, which makes earth-moving equipment, right? He stands next to like a JCB bulldozer. He was spinning the charkha. So I think compared to any previous British Prime Minister, in my memory, Boris Johnson has done a great job of being in the news. And obviously, this is a momentous event. This has been going on, being planned for over a year, and a lot more is expected, right?
And this is the third attempt, right? I mean, a couple of
yes. So obviously, there's been a lot of preparation which has gone on, and compared to like any other foreign dignitary, right? Any other leader of a nation, he has played very well. He himself was a journalist himself, and I think playing to the gallery is his strength, from whatever I can see. So I think he's done that really well. So I think absolutely. Second thing is, because of this current cabinet, so Rishi Sunak, not only is he a person of Indian origin, his wife is an Indian and daughter of Narayan Murthy, very well-respected technology billionaire, and Preeti Patel. So people have seen more Indian faces in the cabinet, right? Not just people who run corner shops in the UK. So I think that has also given a very positive spin to the current Conservative government. So there's a lot more awareness coming from a very low base on politics, especially, right? So I think that gives a very positive image. And hopefully, if this free trade agreement gets signed, we see a lot more Indian and British firms setting up operations in the other country and more people hiring, more person-to-person contact. I think this can only grow. So, yeah.
So, Sunil, before we, wind up, any final thoughts on, what you expect will happen over the coming months or, coming years?
I think as long as Boris Johnson can ride this wave, which I think he will, I expect this relationship to really grow. I think I've been really happy with the two leaders in terms of Boris Johnson and how I think they've made a massive difference in creating this relationship and identifying the potential. So I envisage the sort of short-term quicker ones. I think the visa situation will change. I think it will be a lot easier for Indians to come here. I think student visas will change too, in terms of, I think we'll move to more Australia style, what we have for Australian students to come here. So I think that will definitely change. I think some of the labor shortages we have in the UK, I think India will play a part in filling some of that for us. Longer term, I think UK will be looking at India, and I think India will be looking at themselves also as an alternative to China. I don't think it'll be a direct replacement, but I think it will definitely be a country where they look to I've got a finance background, if you like, spread their risk, increase their sort of portfolio, which I think India, in terms of, if you look at our portfolio, plays a very small part. I think that will really grow in the next few years. I think the UK look at this as an opportunity to get in there first over the States and Europe. So I envisage a pretty strong relationship, growing pretty fast. I think the FTA agreement will just be the start. I agree with Nirav. I think they will exceed their expectations on trade there. I think the biggest issue and concern for me in terms of stopping all these great things happening is ensuring that these two leaders stay in power for their next respective elections. That for me is probably the big question mark. I don't know exactly how well Narendra Modi, all the stats here show that his approvals are sky high. For Boris Johnson, it's a bit different. So I think as long as these two can stay in power for the next term, I envisage a much stronger and really good relationship between the two countries.
Fantastic. So on that very positive note, hey, Nirav, did you want to get a word in?
So basically, I want to come back to the anecdotes, right? What I mentioned in history. The last time you saw like some sort of like really big, you would say like a tumultuous time in the world and this chaos. So one, I gave the example. So one was obviously India became the world's largest cotton producer ahead of the US. So that was during the American Civil War. The whole Indian railways were set up since then, and you saw so there's a lot of riches. A lot of Indian merchants got rich. So this is what I want to highlight. So between the trade, it was not just UK which benefited. A lot of Indian people benefited because of the infrastructure which was set up. A lot of Indians got educated, and a lot of Indian merchants became very wealthy. Right. Second example I want to talk about here. I want to specifically mention China. So one is India, from almost no one drinking tea, within a generation or two became a nation of tea drinkers, because a lot of tea was grown in India. Two, you had like a triangular trade. So some of it may not be the best thing, but UK was importing silk, tea and certain other goods, from porcelain from China, and had a big trade deficit. They made India grow a lot of opium, poppy, which they exported, right? So here again, you saw a lot of Parsi merchants. They say like the founders of the Tata Group were also involved, but not just say producing opium, but they also had shipbuilding. You also had docks being built. You saw trade being flourishing, right? So these things had a knock-on effect on like manufacturing within India and employment. So again, this is what I want to highlight, that you had a country very much dependent on China, and then they found an alternative, which was India, and that transformed India as well. And India wants to build up its manufacturing capabilities, even if you don't replace China. We are going from, like I've said this before on the podcast as well, that going from just in time, having like the lowest cost, fastest, cheapest producer, one single vendor, to having just in case scenarios. What if something goes wrong? What if there's pandemic? What if there's an earthquake or a flood or some typhoon? So you're building resilience at the cost of efficiency. And now India provides another alternative, right, to the UK. And India gets a market which is the same size as India. So it gives you like double the opportunity. And as I mentioned, both these countries are complementary. One is small and rich. The other one is large and you'd say poor. One is good at bespoke things, bespoke expensive things. The other one is good at like doing things at scale. So I think this is where it's a complementary marriage, if one would call it that way, right? So I'm very hopeful for it. And I absolutely think if these things could have like a very convex payoff, and you could probably see trade grow much more than just doubling in 8 years.
Awesome. very optimistic note to end the podcast on. We certainly will partner with the CFOC on many more episodes to come and do our bit to further India and UK relations. Right. So thank you, Sunil. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Nirav, as well. And thanks everyone for joining. See you on another episode very soon. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharatvaarta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.